All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of us maintaining a consistent schedule. It's exciting. Celebrate.
It is very exciting.
Let us know if you can hear everybody properly. If no one can be heard, that's important too. I'll never trust the microphones ever. It's just in my nature. So, we are kind of breaking one of my rules tonight. I don't like to talk about a thing until the thing is looking more concrete. But um in light of what has been happening in our discourse in the last day or so, particularly as Elon Musk has taken up his idiot's trumpet, um, and you're just given what's happening in Riyadh, I think it probably behooves us to kind of talk a little bit about the absurdity that is being presented to us in terms of the war of Ukraine. And what we have is effectively, you've seen Donald Trump make a number of statements. For example, that Ukraine shouldn't have started the war, which is obviously
Yeah,
not
I mean, completely obviously erroneous statements.
not how it works.
Um,
And then Elon Musk goes, if Zelensky wants to be taken seriously as the leader of the Ukrainian people, then he has to stop canceling elections, which of course belies the fact that Zelensky is required by the Ukrainian constitution to suspend elections during a time of martial law. Why should he be forced to weaken the position of the Ukrainian people in order to satisfy the whims of an idiot like Elon Musk? And we have even more troubling Marco Rubio, who is our Secretary of State, and
Ricardo.
uh, possibly one of the worst options for this, with no real standing in the world, is in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, where he is engaged in.
The funny thing is he was kind of the neocon, like, he had a very neoconservative view of this whole thing, but like so many of them, they are definite lapdogs to Trump.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting.
Honestly, though, like I can't say that the neoconservative positions have done anything good for Ukraine, and I am going to address that as well.
Well,
Um,
it's interesting because Marco Rubio is definitely one of the ones that was the most out there in terms of people who might not necessarily hold views Trump likes. But I've heard from multiple people involved in the government that Marco Rubio has a minder, a Trump person that is keeping him on task and on point, kind of like a commissar, if you will, who's there to put him back if he gets out of line. So it's interesting. There is the potential that, and I've also heard that these types of Trump appointees are at other places, and some of them have connections to Dodge and Elon Musk. So,
Interesting. Honestly, maybe that's not such a bad thing as I'm
well,
gonna be flat honest. Like I don't think the neocons have done anything good. People are acting like that they've been the only thing keeping Ukraine afloat, but in reality, it's their unrealistic type of foreign policy that brought Ukraine here.
well, the other half of this is like what has been talked about so far, and nothing concrete has happened yet. Marco Rubio and Lavrov have agreed to restaff their respective embassies, and the phrase they used was "build a mechanism to address mutual irritants," which is a odd turn of phrase for two countries with such colossal firepower to refer to one another. Uh, the probably the more problematic issue has been the sort of ideas floated by Trump and his direct circle, which propose the completion of the Russian annexation of already captured territory. No mention of what happens with this remaining territory of the Kursk Oblast that Ukraine holds, and the keeping of Ukraine out of NATO in exchange for a functional end or a ceasefire. So the trouble, like the immediate response I saw from Ukrainian Twitter was, won't this just cause Russia to rearm and attack us again? And I mean, yes, it will.
Yes. Here is the thing though. Ukraine, such an agreement, at least in theory, it really depends on how, the steps taken afterward. It provides Ukraine with needed time to rearm itself, or to at least entrench itself, and then also fix its infrastructure. Keep in mind, Russia will be using a lot of soft methods to undermine Ukraine during this period, but I think, like, I have a rather, I don't want to say optimistic view of a ceasefire, because there's nothing good about the situation we're in. But honestly, at this point, if nothing like that happens, you're looking at a slow death. And right now, we're at a point. The EU is a big disappointment, by the way. NATO is a big disappointment. As much as anything that this is told, like if this has taught me anything, it's that they are mostly talk, and they don't do shit without us making the first move. If this makes them change that, and they are willing to step up and provide Ukraine with an industrial, military industrial support base, much more than they are doing now, if they step up their own production, if they actually increase their military spending, that is not a bad thing. The problem is that a lot of them cannot get off their ass to do that. They cannot agree on it, and that is the problem with EU bureaucracy. Particularly the Western countries of the EU, by the way. I'm pretty sure if there was like an Eastern alliance, those countries are much more willing, because it's within their interests, much more so than it is to say like in Germany or France's interest, that Ukraine doesn't fall.
Well, there's an automatic problem that happens with France, is that France has a nuclear policy that they feel very comfortable hiding behind, as terrifying as it is. And France's policy is, you look at me funny, I nuke you. So this kind of limits the kind of engagement they want to put militarily into putting anything out there significantly. They participated in Syria, but it was like lackluster. And they participated in certain other exercises, but they don't necessarily function the same way, because their nuke first, ask questions later policy makes them feel probably falsely secure. Germany's kind of inexplicable, but I can certainly see the alarm for the German.
You can explain it pretty easy, actually. It has to do with World War II and the end of it. They're, if they can avoid getting into any such an entanglement, they will do that. And the only reason why they sort of stepped up to the plate this time was due to prodding by the Biden administration and not wanting to look bad on the world stage. But at the very beginning, right when this was about to happen, right as it did happen, it took them a little bit of time to actually shift that policy. And even then, they're divided on it.
I think I think there's another problem for NATO overall. They kind of got a little screwed by the United States in 2001. Like, the idea behind NATO is that we activate and defend things, and Article 5 gets activated for the United States, and all of a sudden they spend, 15, 16, 17 years in the desert. That creates, I think, a very real, what the hell does Afghanistan have to do with Atlantic defense, right?
It really doesn't.
It doesn't. But that was what.
They used Article 5 and decided to get involved in it, and I think it's a way also to sort of flex their muscle, so to speak, to fund their military industrial complex. But they really wasn't much. Now, when there's actually sort of I don't know. I mean, Ukraine is not a NATO member, but this
Right.
has a lot of relevance. As much as I don't really see, like, I don't really like the argument that much. If Ukraine falls, it's a given that Russia's going to attack and try to take the Baltic states. I feel like that they're a lot less likely to do that. They're more likely to subvert, to use subversion in that case. But they're more likely to attack, like countries that are non-aligned with NATO within its sphere, like within its immediate space. Moldova would be the sort of next target.
Yeah, I was about to say Moldova
Yeah.
and Georgia are pretty natural targets.
Yeah, they are.
I
If
think
Armenia was closer, it would be.
yeah,
If
I
they
think
shared a border, but they already are in a precarious position enough. So
yeah, I think the real issue about Russia is not necessarily that they're going to attack NATO or the Baltic states. It's that there hasn't been an immediate consequence for aggression in Ukraine. Like, obviously there is the war, and the war has been like devastating to both sides. But there hasn't been something to tell them, no, if you continue to cross lines, then we will do something about it. And now that Trump is there won't be anything to stop them.
of course.
Um,
Of course, but I would like people to stop using the rhetoric, about the Baltic states being next or Poland being next. I'd also like, I'm not really thrilled with World War II comparisons, because let's be frank, although you can see some parallels, we're in a completely different situation than we were in World War II in 1938. And when you have people like, Timothy Snyder making such comparisons, when he knows, as the brilliant historian that he is, that things don't quite work that way in history. History doesn't repeat itself. There are echoes of it.
well,
The
problem with Snyder, I think, is that Snyder spent so much time being a pop historian that he has picked a path of communication that appeals to people's emotions better than it does strict scholarship.
100%.
So World War II
100%. And that's why
is a very real thing for most people in their minds. It's like, well, what does the History Channel do? Well, it used to do World War II before it did Ancient Aliens and Pawn Stars. That's kind of the problem, is that people don't have a different frame of reference because like their knowledge of other conflicts is meh. Like,
yeah, I mean, World War II is
and
pretty
like
interesting.
the other thing is find
the least.
find fucking Moldova on a map. You and I can do it, but not everyone else can. They can find Poland. Most of them know Polish people because they're fucking everywhere. Because they kept having their own dysporias. So, like, the rhetoric is built around ideas that people understand, not necessarily ideas that will hold up geopolitically.
No, 100%.
And like, I get the frustration because, like, especially if you're you, and you want things to be perfectly ordered just so. I understand your frustration. I just don't necessarily I don't see it happening anytime soon. People are going to appeal to the concept of the Baltic states getting invaded. They're going to appeal to the concept of Poland.
That, but it's problematic, and ultimately, I believe it hurts Ukraine in the long run. Because here, it also, what also enrages me too is, this is fundamentally Ukraine's fight. It's a fight doing the right thing to help Ukraine. I don't think it needs to be argued constantly that Ukrainians dying fighting Russia is benefiting us here. I don't like this sort of geopolitical bullshit. I have friends in Ukraine. I have people I love in Ukraine, and helping them is helping them stay alive so they don't die. That's all that fucking matters to me. And I don't need to convince some American, some other American otherwise, and I can see why some of them wouldn't give a crap about this conflict. It quite frankly does not have that much consequence to us. It really doesn't, but it means it's life and death for them. And that is enough to, support them. Obviously, people are going to, appeal to that sort of American character of like, okay, you're protecting democracy against a totalitarian or authoritarian regime. But, at its basic level, it's just helping
I'll be
people
perfectly
against an aggressor.
I'll be perfectly frank. I've never worked much. I don't like the argument of yes, it's been very cost effective for us to help Ukraine, because this presumes a great deal of things on the face of it about the reason this is happening, and it might be a very realpolitik thing at the end of the day for some people, but people don't grasp that argument fundamentally because they don't grasp the cost of things.
I also think too there's no cost benefit analysis with this at all. For example, at the beginning, and I've argued this a lot. People, it's not a popular position, but I thought I was waiting for there to be some sort of back channel talk at the very beginning of this that might have resulted in a very unfair deal for Ukraine overall, but would have prevented this full-scale invasion. Granted, I could be completely wrong. Like my friends who tend to take my friends and colleagues who take the neoconservative view would say, Russian invasion, this was inevitable. I don't fully believe that.
It wasn't inevitable. I will stake this hill and die on it. Had Biden said we will fight alongside Ukraine, Russia would have scampered off home.
Yeah. I mean, that's an approach that could have been
taken. Probably wouldn't sure. You probably wouldn't have had to do it. I would have dropped off. I would that early portion, late December, when he already knew what was happening. I would have moved a whole extra division over here from the United States to Poland and said, if you do this, we're going to fight alongside Ukraine. And at that point, I think Putin would have balked.
He probably would have. There would have been actually some real talks.
Yeah, and I promise you, and I promised Twitter that we would be hitting Biden this night too. Biden's foreign policy was, in both regards, particularly to the two most outstanding issues of it, Ukraine and Israel. Biden's foreign policy was horrifically bad, weak on every level.
It was weak and incrementalist. Kind of like, I can actually see some logic behind it because it follows a logic, you don't entirely know how to predict Putin. People have been, saying, oh, this is the way you got to respond to him. Like there's the approach that you're advocating. There's the approach of, okay, let's actually discuss this. It would be discussing, issues, regarding NATO membership, Ukraine's sovereignty to a large degree. That's what's happening now, right?
Yes.
I think it could have possibly happened in the beginning if you're like, okay, here's maybe a deal we could reach. Ukraine will continue its path to EU integration, but NATO is off the table. Of course, I think that would have been something that Russia could have agreed to. The issue is, though, is that they would still be doing soft power means to subvert Ukrainian democracy. That would never stop.
Well,
Yes, it avoids that scenario. If it could have been reached, would avoid what we have now. And I mean, there are worst case scenarios than what we have now, but very few. Ukraine has lost a lot of people. And I'm not even talking just about military and civilian casualties. I'm talking about all the people that have left.
right.
There are also, and I think I've brought this up on our podcast before, Ukraine, the Ukrainian state, throughout its existence, through most of its existence, and even to a large degree now, has really failed meeting the basic needs of its citizens. And it's created the mentality in a large portion of the population, which is essentially, why are we going to defend our country anyway? It's not everybody has this belief or this thought, but a significant number of them do. Military age men who are trying to leave. There are those who already have families, and they're saying, sticking around here in a place, that is very corrupt, throughout my entire, like, a lot of these people, they were maybe born in the 80s or born in the 90s, and they have seen throughout their life, through most of it, the extreme corruption that Ukraine had, especially pre-2014. Things changed a bit since then. There have been more austere measures, but it's at a slow pace. But they're there's no question, if some force attacked the United States, you and I, despite the problems that we have had here, we've had pretty good lives in comparison. So we would have more of a sense of duty. It's not to say that there are not Ukrainians that have this. There are hundreds of thousands of them that do. There are those who are fighting. But there's also hundreds of thousands of them that don't. And there are people actively hiding from, they literally have to pull people off the street to mobilize them.
Well,
because they don't. And part of there's also other factors to this. I mean, training is not always adequate. Ukraine is, I think that in some ways I can say that they are doing the best that they can in this situation. But, there were endemic problems there to start. So, Ukraine was always in a bad position to fight this war. It was never, they were never really truly in an advantageous position, and would always have to rely on the help of others in order to just survive it, let alone win. And that is where we're at. And that help with Trump, that's going away. That is the big issue. The issue is, that support drying up, and the EU and NATO countries not willing to get up off their ass to truly make a concerted effort to help them.
I'm going to stop
you. Let me finish.
Sure.
I am very proud of the Ukrainian armed forces, of my friends fighting there. Because they have done an really extraordinary thing. They have fought like a Wolverine, fighting a bear like this. I mean, they're smaller, they're not as strong, but they're fighting viciously, and they have actually, Russia's military capability has been greatly reduced. They've gained a lot of experience through this, for sure. But and even their production has been hit very hard. Ukraine has done an excellent job of projecting, force projection. They really have, especially with the limited means that they've had. But, at the end of the day, they're fighting a country that has a stronger industrial base. They're fighting a country that has a bigger population, that has less value of the lives of their soldiers, which, they're willing to employ them in all sorts of ways that, they can wear Ukraine down. And Ukraine, that's my fear, is that if this continues, even with a Biden style approach of incrementalism, you either got to go really like you said, you have to go all in. If you're going to, try to stop this via, strength, you have to really project that strength. You cannot fucking do it half-ass. You just can't. And that's what was done.
That's why I made the argument the way I did. I want to respond to Zalrock over here in chat. Yes, you're right. If Obama had a stronger response in 2014 to the annexation of the Crimea, you probably wouldn't see this happening. I don't necessarily want to fault the rest of Obama's foreign policy in the same way, though. There is some, I think his energy was misplaced, in primarily in seeking a nuclear agreement with Iran, because of the nature of the fact that benefits the United States not at all, and it only really benefits Israel, to be frank. The other thing I want to point out is I pulled up my Clausewitz today, and I started reading again because I'm going to start doing stuff on that too. And I was reminded of this certain, people don't read Clausewitz well. They read the cliff notes at best, or they just go by quotes. So everybody has heard the aphorism, "War is a continuation of policies by other means," not realizing that that's part of a larger dialectical conversation that results in a different thing. Eventually, Clausewitz settles on what's called the fascinating trinity of war. The fact that war is a combination of emotional response, logical and reasoned policy, and chance. And the thing you talked about, Ukrainians' power projection, some of it's been really good and efficacious and effective, and some of it's just been that emotional leg of the Trinity, the fuck you to Russia, which I understand on a basic level. But what did deploying special forces to Sudan accomplish in the long run?
No, 100%. That I can't really see the tactical benefits of that.
And I still we've sat on this for months, and I said it before, I still don't quite understand what invading Kursk has purchased for them. It feels good. It's on that emotional leg of the Trinity, but it's not necessarily on the I don't understand what concrete benefit it brings. So
yeah, no, 100%.
As well as the individual Ukrainian soldiers have done, executing their missions for the most part, there is, I think, some schizo-ness going on up top. Ukraine, a country without a navy, destroyed Russia's Black Sea Navy. And that was pretty funny. Yes, it was. I also think that is there's a lot, I think, that is going to be taken from Ukraine militarily in terms of study in the next decade. Hopefully they won't have to be put to the test sooner. But the ingenuity that has been put on display by both sides as this war has gone on has been kind of remarkable on a certain level. We make fun of the Russian cope cages, and they certainly do have some disadvantages. But that has actually helped in a lot of cases against drones, or just how Ukraine has started to use drones, mass produce them cheaply, in a different way. They are making up for capabilities they don't otherwise have by these use of these drones, particularly in terms of long range artillery and precision guided munitions and the like. And this is a thing that we're going to have to contend with, because these answers are now out there in the ecosystem, and the kind of traditional American overpowering of people is going to be like different in our future wars. Like we're going to have to
Yeah,
start contending with
we haven't
drones on a
actually.
individualistic basis.
Yeah, we actually haven't. I mean, obviously, we're probably learning from this, but we haven't dealt with these challenges yet, and it'll be interesting, if we're ever in that position, which I suspect will be at some point. I don't think we're going to be fighting Russia, but
Well, let's take a
um,
hypothetical conflict with China. The Chinese army is, in a lot of ways, in the same space that the Ukrainian army was in when it started the war. They have capabilities, but they're largely untested and untried, and they're probably not necessarily going to be able to manifest and operate in the same way that they have imagined, and they're going to have to adapt and overcome to continue to
I,
fight.
I I was actually going to say like they're more like the Russian army in a lot of ways too. I could see them having a lot of the same problems starting out. If they were to do a if the
It is hard to.
conflict with Taiwan happens.
I don't think it'll be over Taiwan. It'll probably be something different, Frank. Well, yeah, the Kursk offensive seems silly, but it showed at least that Russian defensive capability. There are a couple things that showed, like the fact that
Mhm.
they crossed the Russian border like that in force, and Russia was kind of paralyzed to respond, demonstrates that Russia's military is in large part fully invested in Ukraine and in its invasion of Ukraine, and they don't have sufficient military power anywhere else. So if there was someone who was looking to take advantage of that, they could. Probably not, because the only people who are positioned to take advantage of that are making a hell of a lot of money off of selling Russia weapons. The other thing I think it showed is like it fractures the prevailing theory of nuclear deterrence that has existed since the end of World War II. Like we have to rethink this stuff now, because the thought was that a nuclear weapon protects you from invasion by making it too terrifying to invade, and Ukraine just fucking called Russia's bluff on that. So, there is like a long term doctrinal problem to solve. That kind of brings out like, well, what do nuclear weapons do except scare the hell out of people who understand how they work? Hey, Steph.
It begs the question too, in what condition is Russia's nuclear deterrent?
That which
Clearly,
is
they're
definitely a question we've asked before,
yeah,
or at
we've
least I
brought that up
have,
before. Yeah,
because I like understanding the expense involved in the maintenance of nuclear weapons makes you wonder like how Russia lets everything else rot in depots. Have they, due to graft and corruption, have they, like, the nuclear weapons like are so remote chance of them being used, you can't imagine that they've been maintaining those the way they have to.
yeah, but it only takes a few, so that's the problem.
I don't think like Ukraine has wiped out a large portion of Russian military generals. Fair. Part of that though runs to a particular like difference for how Russia sees their military and how we, for example, see ours. We tend to place generals on the same kind of like social pedestal as we do CEOs. We value them to a certain extent, not fully. Obviously, we don't pay them as much, but we value them to a certain extent, and we see their careers as worthwhile. Um, this is not true of Russian society. The career army officers and NCOs were always kind of like, "Is that the best you can do? You're in the army." It's a different kind of organization because politically
That
it
and
doesn't.
they have a tendency to lead from the front.
Yes, which our lower ranking officers certainly do. Um, the other problem of this is like Putin doesn't want a strong military. That's why Wagner exists in the first place, because theoretically he's paying their bills and therefore they are more loyal to him than they are to any other oligarch. Uh, Putin doesn't want a strong military because a strong military is like the true catch-22 of a totalitarian society. If I have a strong, effective military, one of my generals is going to suddenly decide that he can do my job better than me and kill me. So it doesn't behoove me to have a good military.
Yeah.
It's that and you see this dynamic. It plays out a lot more frequently in like West Africa and East Africa, to be fair. The Congo. But and to a lesser extent South America. But it is a truism of undemocratic, illiberal governments is they don't tend to have effective military institutions. Yeah, I got nothing. Go ahead.
Um, one thing that I could see as a possible benefit of a ceasefire that would last a few years. Russia can rearm. It has learned something from this conflict, but their ability to kind of absorb information, this has always been a problematic thing. Their ability to learn from their mistakes is limited as at best. It's usually good during the conflict, but if there is a gap in between, they tend not to keep that information. I mean, this could prove to be wrong.
You could.
They did learn, for example, from the first Chechen war, and in the second one, they did much better tactically, but
for a given value of tactically leveling the whole last city of Grozny,
leveling, using
is
a lot
not necessarily
heavier of a hand.
Not necessarily a tactical upgrade. Like finesse, not so much.
I have a really good book by Olya, I think it's Olenka or something. She's a Russian military analyst on the urban fighting in the first two Chechen wars, and she does note actually some lessons that were learned from the first two battles of Grozny and the first Chechen war that were applied, but there were still a lot of deficiencies. There were deficiencies when Russia invaded Georgia, and of course a lot more during this last conflict. And they've been, they have lost a good portion of their experienced soldiers.
Well, what the problem is kind of the same connection. Institutional memory depends upon the existence of individuals across periods of time for an organization where they have to engage in this. So, for example, Russia doesn't have great institutional memory because a lot of the career soldiers are, well, basically dead. There are new ones that are going to replace them in certain cases, but not all of these are going to stick. Like the people who really have the know-how are going to be those NCOs, and they're going to go back to their regular lives if the army disbands. And they are going to probably not necessarily come back to the army in the future unless they have to. They're not going to be passing on that institutional knowledge of what they learned. There's going to be kind of like this vague recollection happening instead of an actual like continuity of training. And that is why they're not necessarily going to like, if this, like, let's be honest, like I'll be perfectly blunt about a ceasefire. Russia is about as trustworthy as Israel in this regard in keeping a ceasefire. It will start up again. Like there will be another conflict. And
for sure.
And like Russia has like the idea that Ukraine can rearm is somewhat dependent on their ability to invest in their own domestic military industrial complex, which isn't bad, to be frank, but it's also like the money has to go into it, and I don't necessarily trust that to be the case. I don't trust the United States to rearm them appropriately with Trump in the office or a hypothetical Vance administration, as even worse as that sounds. So like there is a lot working against the ceasefire is advantageous to Ukraine, in my mind. The my real point is like the safest path for Ukraine at the moment that seems feasible and is probably like to a certain extent unthinkable for a lot of Ukrainians and Ukrainian supporters is to draw the lines up where you are, let Russia annex what it's got, and join NATO, and that is a guard against future attacks. But like on their own, they will be attacked again, and like 10 years, 15 years, maybe sooner. Giving away the store and there's a fundamental problem with like the discussion around NATO in the first place. Like Russian apologists and Russians love to say, well, we were promised that NATO wouldn't expand east. No such promise was made, and no such promise can really be made because NATO's accession process depends upon the whole agreeing to a new country joining. So like a country can veto that, but then they're going to get pressure from those countries that want them to join. And any promise I make to a Russian ambassador is going to be outweighed by my need to maintain my relationships with Poland and Belgium and Holland, etc.
Зарак, ви українською розмовляєте чи ні? Sorry, I thought I would ask him.
Gesundheit.
I asked him if he spoke Ukrainian.
The U.S. security guarantee was a total waste of paper for Ukraine giving up nukes for the U.S. help if they got attacked back in 91. I mean, yes, but at the same time, those are nuclear weapons for which the codes were in Moscow, and they were unlucky to give them up. So they'd basically have to hire somebody to jailbreak the nukes to make them usable.
They also had the launch codes in Moscow for most of their missiles. Yeah.
So you end up with a circumstance of you have to pay to maintain the nukes, and then you have to pay someone an extravagant amount of money to make it so that you can, again, use the nuke when Russia doesn't give up the codes. So like the idea made sense under the framework that they were thinking that United States was, just out of the Cold War.
That, and there was really no indication at that time that this would ever happen.
Yeah, Russia was kind of a broken mess at this point.
Not even just a broken mess, but, Ukraine was a very broken mess too. It was extremely corrupt. Most of the, it was basically like a mafia state. So, at the time.
Yeah, and
so,
Yeltsin.
Just the thought of those two things.
Yeltsin was kind of closer to Santa Claus than Putin will ever be.
Oh, for sure. There's no doubt about that.
Like he's a jolly old elf.
I kind of miss him.
Yeah, I'll be frank. The general trajectory of the world in the last 30 years has kind of made me miss certain things. Like I miss George W. Bush now that I've dealt with Trump twice.
I don't miss that fucker at all.
Yeah, he was bad, but he wasn't this bad.
In terms of domestic policy, no. But nothing can justify the invasion of Iraq and everything else that entailed it.
Well, good. So when we figure out what happens when we invade Greenland, that'll be fun too.
It'll still be easier than Iraq.
Greenland has polar bears. No, it won't.
Those polar bears have to be armed with AK-47s.
That seems doable. Like the guy who gives the polar bear the AK-47 is going to get eaten, but okay. All price to pay. And that's like, I joke, but this is not really, it's not great. Like, I've noticed that like we have had a stupid number. This is a completely irrelevant aside. We have had a stupid number of plane crashes in the United States and or in United States airliners in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I'm starting to think that DEI actually makes airplanes fly. Like, don't be mean to the transes. They have the power to knock airplanes out of the sky. What the heck? That was funny. Laugh.
I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Um, no, you're right.
Like yes, I read one happened today. Two airplanes crashed into one another at a small airport. This is not supposed to happen. Are we just handing out
No, this is
pilot's
happening
license?
at an alarming rate.
Yeah, are we just handing out pilot's license to any jackass as long as they're white? What's going on?
Oh, Lucy's here.
Hi, Lucy. The
Dzień dobry.
the other half. Lucy's been busy. She's been going back and forth to Ukraine, as I understand it.
Very good.
The other half of it is like I saw Eurofighters got donated to Ukraine recently, like 4 of them, and I'm kind of like, woohoo!
Eurofighters?
I think so, or it was
This
Typhoon.
is news to me.
I gotta check. I'd have to check again, see which one it
Was it not a Saab Gripen maybe, or I
It
mean
might have been.
Eurofighters?
It might have been a Gripen. Hang on. Recent plane donations to Ukraine. Google save me. Something from France, not Saabs.
Raphael?
Saab wants to send Gripens. Danish
Yeah,
F-16s.
that couldn't be more true today. My friend in Ukraine, we were at like a picnic, and he said, I think it was something like Україна розташовується між двома жопами. It's sits in between two asses. The United States and Russia. Двома жопами.
6 F-16. All right, I'm not sure which one it is, and BBC isn't saying, so we'll say that.
We've been very clear on this channel that there are no Wunderwaffen in this conflict.
No, that's yeah. Sorry, if I was unclear, the problem isn't like the problem isn't that like they just send, they need more planes and they just aren't getting enough. Like the biggest, like, here's the thing: if Ukraine had a robust air force that could push Russian aircraft out of the Ukrainian controlled areas, I reckon they could probably win. And take back the territory, but they don't. And this like is hampering them immensely. So it's not necessarily the type of aircraft. It's having enough to be able to perform the missions reliably and to absorb some losses.
Yeah.
They don't have that particular advantage. They have aircraft that they can use to defend against things. But the other half of this is that Russia embarked in a very like, now it's advantageous, and it did not necessarily appear to get it. Like Russia built a number of long-range bombers that fire cruise missiles, which they have used to great effect to kill Ukrainians in cities that aren't on the front line. These bombers were originally designed to overwhelm a carrier group with missiles and sink American carriers. So you really run into a significant like issue of like, Russia now has these bombing platforms that they can use. They can launch them from a Russian airbase, loiter around Russia, fire their missiles at targets, and land without ever really being exposed to American air defenses, or excuse me, Ukrainian air defenses.
Yeah, we would be in a different scenario if they got that amount. Obviously, they didn't.
And actually got to 320 billion.
I don't know if they would be taking back Crimea by now, but there'd be a lot less dead Ukrainians, I can tell you that.
Yeah, overall, the slow pace that by like we've given them so much in aid, except it's not coming through, it's not going. The incredibly slow pace of delivery of like Abrams tanks. Like I still don't think they have all of the promised Abrams tanks from the United States.
No, they don't.
It's not like we're using them.
The real no, we're not. The real star of this war, as far as armored vehicles, I think, has been the Bradley. I think it's really shown how good of a.
Well, I think broadly the Bradley was a lot more popular in military circles than it is in civilian circles before the war, but I think it's kind of moved the other way. The abomination that is the movie Pentagon Wars did a number on the public perception of the Bradley.
Lucy, you missed my rant about the EU and particularly also how I mean you might have a different opinion on this, but you can catch my rant and maybe we can have a discussion about it.
I think more pertinently about the Israel aid is the artillery shells that they gave to Israel. Like a lot of like what ended up happening with it, they used bombs that they shouldn't have used on apartment buildings, and that's bad. But like, for example, Israel was using 2,000-pound bombs, and broadly speaking, no one else uses 2,000-pound bombs. Most people don't have them because they're like a 2,000-pound bomb makes a huge explosion, and you're dropping two at a time. So really, it's 4,000 pounds worth of bombs. The second half of that is like this diversion of artillery shells, particularly with how vital artillery is to Ukraine's combat gaps. Like because they don't have the ability to operate an air force freely in Russian territory the way we would, they rely a lot more heavily on artillery to keep the Russians at bay. That hurt a lot more than anything else, I think.
Oh, artillery, especially at the beginning too. That's artillery is what saved Chernihiv, actually. It's really what saved
broadly speaking. Like we talked a lot about, we, not us in particular, but we as a society talked a lot about, look at the great Javelin missile and the NLAW. And like you look at the information that's come out of that initial stage of the 2022 invasion, it's the artillery pieces, largely Ukraine's domestic artillery Soviet at that point.
Stock. Yeah, Soviet era stock
that was stopping the Russian advance.
Russians to pieces. Yeah, it's kind of ironic, right? Like, and actually, a lot of their systems they were using, Russia still had a lot of the same systems, but Ukraine was using, the ironic thing, a lot of the older ones.
So we're not
setting up a debate. Maybe, but I don't know. Liz, watch the whole video and then maybe we can set that up.
I wash my hands of this.
I don't want to have a debate over the EU. I mean, outside of Poland and the eastern countries of the EU, I don't really like the EU. I know I just don't. They have a hard time getting stuff done. I mean, at least like in regards to this.
Well, the EU has also been preoccupied with other things of Russian invention as well. There is a not insubstantial...
Yeah, kind of fitting the cables, yeah.
Well, even beyond that, like you talked a little bit about the use of soft power. Russia is a very prolific user of liminal warfare to try to affect the political processes of other countries. In a very in a very aggressive way that kind of maintains their ability to do things like invade Ukraine. Go
ahead.
This is largely why I kind of I marvel at this transition they made from this kind of soft power influencing of Ukraine and this liminal warfare influencing of Ukraine to the other half of this like they were doing very well this way. they were having a very real effect on destabilizing societies.
I got something very, very, very relevant to say on that. Had they actually continued that campaign, they by this time certainly would have had a pro-Russian politician in office.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They had they not decided to invade, they surely would have won.
There is
because everybody, like, I mean, they made Zelensky was very unpopular actually by that time. I mean, not like extremely, but his popularity was waning. And Ukrainians are a very pessimistic people. Quite honestly, up until the very, very point they started bombing and shelling people. Like, I mean, at least, you know, I'm not talking about like, you know, 2014 up until 22. I'm talking about when the full-scale invasion happened. I had students telling me in places like Nizhyn, which are not, you know, is not a like 100% pro-Russian area. I mean, Chernihiv Oblast is very kind of in the middle ground. It was in the middle ground, sort of, where they're not pro-Russian, but they're not necessarily anti. There's a kind of a balance of both. But up until the very start of this, my students, some of them were telling me about how their classmates are saying, we hope they come. So, I mean, the thing is when you're getting shelled and bombed, when you're in that situation, you start to rethink things. But they wouldn't have had to do that. That wasn't something that they ever should have done. And that's actually what's made me really, either they believe their own bullshit so much that they're willing to, you know, risk everything, and they made a colossal mistake, or their intelligence capability is not that good. Not as good as the world claims it to be.
Theirs being the Russians?
Yes.
Well, that's the really curious, like, here's the curious thing. It is like obviously faux pas now in conservative circles to admit that the Russians had a major impact on the 2016 election. And like I've talked a little bit about the methodology of this before, where like they sort of like use social media to bring up wedge issues and try to divide people, and not necessarily take changing the results in a voting machine, but getting people to be less engaged, less likely to vote. This helps the conservatives immensely, and like I think they walked into 2024 or 2016 rather, looking for this opportunity to kind of like hurt Hillary Clinton, wound her on the ground so that she doesn't appear to have a mandate. It looks like a deeply divided and bitterly divided country, because the media panders to that kind of thing and will automatically poo anyone who tries to do something in an environment where it doesn't appear that 55% of the country voted for a Democrat. And they're like the dog that caught the car. Trump won and they didn't know what to do. And then 2020 rolls around and Trump loses. And then Russia's like, well, let's wound Kamala Harris on the uptake again. And they did the same things again. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump got elected again. And then the Russians are sitting there going, what the fuck? And the same thing with Brexit, right? The Russians are like, let's wound the country by making Brexit appear to be a much more divisive issue than it actually is. And all of a sudden Leave wins and Russia's like, well, I don't understand what the fuck just happened. And this gives them this kind of false sense of security too. They look like, I have to invade Ukraine because I'm not going to get the opportunity, because we're not going to get Trump again, because no one could be that fucking stupid. Well, it turns out we were actually that fucking stupid. So now Putin has this golden opportunity. He has Trump in office again. He has a very war-weary American population on a lot of fronts. They've watched the Israeli conflict in Gaza, and they've seen our involvement in that, and people broadly didn't approve of that. They've seen Ukraine, and there's been a major push to make it not our problem in a lot of media circles. There's this golden opportunity he has that he has to bring to fruition in Riyadh, of like getting Trump to apply pressure to Ukraine to end the war. I don't think this is a concrete plan that he has. Like, I want to see what I like. Putin knows he's in a spot, and he knows he needs to get what he can get now. So he's going to push for it. Whether or not Zelensky accepts it is a different story. I don't see that happening, but he's going to try. Like, at the very least, Putin can try to take America out of the equation, and that's the danger here. Ukraine is still, like, as anemic as it is, they still benefit from our aid. Hetman, did you die? Oh, he might actually have died. Well, I need a new co-host. I'll be taking the applications.
What about now?
Oh, now I can hear you. I guess we canceled the new co-host. Can you? Hello? Did you break the thing? We can't hear you, Hetman, if you're talking.
Hello?
Yes, hello. How are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I did not break it.
Yet. I don't see Ukrainians. Yeah, I don't imagine that. We went a little later than normal tonight, and I know you have to
Get to bed pretty soon.
Yes, because it's a school day. So why don't you go ahead and put any last thoughts you have, and let's get this wrapped up.
The quote, the movie, yeah, that's Apocalypse Now. We're right straight in the middle of a shit sandwich and everyone wants to take a bite.
I don't. That sounds horrible.
Yeah, it does. But yeah, no, this isn't a good situation in any case. And I'm just hoping for the best, out of it. We'll see what happens. I'm very worried about my friends.
Obviously, there is these talks are in early stages, so maybe someone will, like, suddenly and amazingly come to their senses. Maybe I don't see that as a real possibility anytime soon. I have a feeling I'm about to be deeply disappointed in us as a country. That's all. More than I already am disappointed in the last couple of years.
We'll be doing some updates. We'll be following this as it develops. Right now, we're very early. Yeah. So, yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's been actually, as depressing as the topic is, it's been very good for me to get a lot of this off my chest and to talk with all of you guys. So, yeah, those of you who pray for Ukraine, and hopefully we can avoid the worst case scenario.
I think that about sums it up.
With that, I
wish you all
ready to go.
A very good night.
Good